It seems like for as long as we've been telling stories, we've been absolutely obsessed with the last story, the end of the world, the apocalypse, the day of reckoning, whatever you want to call it. This idea is just woven so deeply into our history. So the big question is, why? I know. It sounds like the start of a really weird joke, right? But believe it or not, there's a real connection there. And digging into it tells us a ton about why we just can't stop trying to predict our own end. Okay, so first things first, we have to get one thing straight. This whole idea of doomsday, it's not some modern thing. It's not about Y2K or zombie movies. No way. The roots of this go deep. We're talking ancient, stretching all the way back to the very beginnings of religion and culture, all over the world. And what's so wild is how these stories pop up everywhere. Take the Great Flood. You think Noah's Ark, right? But that story, or something a lot like it, is in the Epic of Gilgamesh from ancient Mesopotamia. It's in Hindu Puranas. It's a global thing. And Armageddon, that final epic battle, it just taps right into our most basic fears of total chaos and war. So these aren't just random one-off myths. They're more like a shared human memory of disaster and the idea of starting over. All right, so keeping that ancient history in mind, let's jump forward and meet a prophet you would never expect. We're talking about a guy who was all about logic, all about reason, but who secretly spent decades of his life trying to crunch the numbers on the exact date of the apocalypse. Yep, you're seeing that right. We're talking about Sir Isaac Newton, the apple on the head, figured out gravity guy. It's kind of crazy, because while we all know him for his incredible world-changing science, Newton was also spending a huge amount of his time buried in old biblical texts, totally convinced that he could crack a hidden code that would tell him when the world was going to end. And after all that work, all those calculations, he landed on this one specific year, 2060. That's it. According to one of the most brilliant minds in human history, that's our expiration date. So you gotta be wondering, how on earth did he come up with that? Okay, so this wasn't some kind of mystical vision in a dream. For Newton, it was basically a math problem. He zoomed in on a passage in the Bible's book of Daniel that talks about 1,260 days. His theory was that in prophecy speak, one day actually means 1 year. Simple enough. Then he needed a starting point. He picked 800 AD. That's when Charlemagne was crowned emperor. A huge deal. So you take 800, you add the 1,260 years, and boom, you land right in 2060. It's this incredible mix of a scientific mind trying to solve an ancient mystery. So we've got Newton and his precise, calculated date. Now let's do a complete 180 and look at a totally different style of prophecy. It's time to talk about the master of vague, cryptic warnings. Probably the most famous prophet of all time, Nostradamus. And this is classic Nostradamus. It's poetic, it's super vague, but when you look back, after the fact, people have pointed to this and said, whoa, they've interpreted this as a chillingly spot-on prediction of Adolf Hitler, rising from poverty to seduce huge crowds with his words. See, that's the thing with Nostradamus. His real power is in how vague he is. It lets people connect the dots for centuries. He wrote about fire in the year 66. Well, the Great Fire of London was in 1666. He talked about someone named Heister, which is just uncomfortably close to Hitler. He even wrote about the sky will burn at 45 degrees near a new city, and a lot of people have connected that to the 9/11 attacks. And get this, his predictions go all the way to the year 3797, so he gives us a lot of runway. So when you put them side by side, you see the huge difference in their methods, right? Newton, the scientist, gives us one single date based on a formula. Nostradamus, the prophet, gives us thousands of years of cryptic poems that he said were visions from God. One's a math equation you solve, the other's a poem you have to interpret. But here's the thing. For every prediction that seems eerily accurate, there are just countless others that totally miss the mark. They fail spectacularly. And when a lot of people really start to believe in these failed prophecies, the consequences can get serious. We're talking everything from mass panic to actual real-world harm. I bet a lot of you remember these. First, there was the Y2K bug. This was a technological doomsday, the idea that computers everywhere would just crash when the clock hit the year 2000. It caused a ton of panic, but in the end, the crisis was averted. Then, of course, there was 2012. People took the end of a cycle in the Mayan calendar and blew it up into the end of the world. And in both cases, well, the sun came up the next day, and here we are. But sometimes the outcome isn't so harmless. Sometimes these beliefs don't just fizzle out. When an apocalyptic prophecy becomes the absolute core belief of a group, things can get really dark really fast. The consequences can be just devastating. Just look at two really tragic examples from the 90s. You had the Branch Davidians, a group convinced the apocalypse was right around the corner. It all ended in that terrible, fiery siege in Waco, Texas, where so many people died. And then, around the same time, the doomsday cult Arm Shinrikyo unleashed deadly sarin gas on the Tokyo subway. They actually thought they were triggering Armageddon. That's the real danger, you see. It's when that belief crosses the line into destructive, deadly action. So those tragedies really show the destructive power of just believing the end is coming. But what happens when we shift gears? What if we move away from ancient prophecies and start looking at modern data? What happens when it's scientists, not prophets, who start warning us that we're pushing ourselves right to the edge? Well, that brings us to the doomsday clock. This was actually created way back in 1947 by the very scientists who helped build the first atomic bombs. And it's important to note, this isn't a prediction, it's an assessment. It's a symbol, a powerful metaphor for how close we are to wiping ourselves out with our own technology. Things like nuclear war, climate change, you get the idea. So where's the clock sitting today? Well, it's set at 90 seconds to midnight. That is the closest it has ever been to catastrophe. And the scientists who run it point to very real things. The war in Ukraine, the rising threat of nuclear weapons, and the fact that we're just not doing enough about the climate crisis. It's not a prophecy. It's a stark warning based on cold, hard data. And that kind of leaves you with a chilling thought, doesn't it? For literally centuries, we've been looking up to the heavens, searching for signs from gods and prophets. But what if the doomsday clock has it right? What if the truest prophecies about our end aren't buried in some ancient text, but are sitting right there in our daily news headlines? But hey, before we leave it on such a heavy note, there is one more prophet we absolutely have to talk about, and it might just be the most unlikely and weirdly accurate one of them all. I'm not kidding, The Simpsons. Think about it. Back in 2000, they had an episode where Lisa Simpson becomes president right after President Donald Trump. In 1998, there was a quick joke about Disney buying 20th Century Fox, and that actually happened 21 years later. There was an episode from 97 with some imagery that felt, well, eerily similar to the 9/11 attacks. And they even had a storyline about a submersible going down to a shipwreck and getting lost. So what is it? Just a whole bunch of crazy coincidences? Really sharp satire that just happens to come true? Or is it possible the most reliable prophet we have is a cartoon family from Springfield? It's a pretty bizarre final thought in our very long history of trying to figure out how it all ends.